Okay, so this is a quick recording. Well, I say quick, it could be a while. um, but it is a re-recording of a live stream that I hosted last week Friday as I prepare for my WordCamp US workshop. Um, the live stream had some issues halfway through. Halfway through the live stream, the screen froze, and I didn't notice. And so there's me talking for 25 minutes and then me talking for another 35 minutes, but just the same code window on the screen. So I'm just re-recording essentially the content for that live stream as a bit of a prep for my WordCamp US talk. I'm going to go through the basic steps for the WordCamp US workshop. So if you're planning on attending the workshop, maybe don't watch this video because I'm going to cover this in the workshop. You're welcome to watch it as well because it's going to be some of the setup that we're going to be doing. I'm not going to be diving into more of the advanced stuff that I'm planning for the workshop. So still come along to the workshop for that. Or if you just can't make it to the workshop and you want to see what I'm going to be talking about, there's this video. So it's the video title, the workshop title should I say, is Turn Your Local WordPress Install into Your AI Coding Assistant. I'm focused more on the developer side of this topic. As we go into this topic, there are other use cases for this, which I can discuss in the workshop or in the comments in this video. But I'm focusing more on the development side, which is why we're talking about coding and AI. So let's dive into some of the core concepts of this topic. So the first thing is something called Model Context Protocol. So Model Context Protocol, or MCP, is an open protocol that was developed by the company Anthropic. They're the folks behind Claude, one of the LLMs. And it's basically a way to allow any other application or piece of software to provide context to your LLMs. So if you know anything about AI or LLMs, you will know that they're trained on huge data sets of information. But that means there is a limit to the information they have access to. While it might be vast, it is limited. So, for example, let me show you what I'm talking about there. If I open up my Visual Studio Code, and I have an AI Experiments website running in my Studio Local Development environment, there it is over there. I can click on WP Admin and go check out that site. Let's just log in here quickly. So it's a site, it exists, it works, it's a WordPress install. If I open up Visual Studio Code, is it Visual Studio Code or Visual Code Studio? I can never remember. VS Code, Visual Studio Code. And I open up the GitHub Copilot integration into VS Code, and I ask it a question, and I say, get me the site info of my AI experiments site. It can't actually get any information about the site. It needs specific information. And it needs to know where to get this information and how to get this information, because all it has access to is what is in the current context, which in this case is the code itself. I have to open up code windows, or I have to add context using the add context option. It has no understanding or knowledge about the running WordPress site as I'm developing. MCP is a way that you can give your code editor, your desktop application, your AI-powered desktop application, context about your site. Now, you need to create that context. You need to give it the context itself. But once you've set that up, as you're working with these sites and these products, you can keep using the context that you prepare for it. Okay, so that's MCP. There are a whole bunch. If you go over to the MCP documentation, you click on Community, there are a whole bunch of example servers that you can use. So you can, for example, connect your AI tool to your file system using MCP, and you can then run file system commands. This is quite a fun one to do, and maybe we can do this in the workshop in real time. I might do this in the workshop. We'll see how much time there is. But essentially what you can do is you can connect your VS Code, your whatever, to your file system through an MCP server, and you can then tell Copilot, say, hey, create files or edit files or whatever the case may be, move files around. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can do there. There are also a whole bunch of official and community implementations. And if you go over to the MCP servers registry, which is on github.com/modelcontextprotocol/servers, there is a whole list of official integrations. WordPress is not on here yet, and I'll explain why in a second. But you can connect all kinds of things to your LLM systems and do all kinds of fun stuff. So what I'm going to be showing you today is how you can do this with WordPress. To do that, you need to have 3 pieces of software right now. The first piece of software is something called an MCP adapter. This is a official WordPress core AI team project. So let's go back one step here, because I forgot to mention this. So if you didn't know, the WordPress project has a core AI team. This was launched in about May, June of this year, and they're working on 4 AI building blocks for WordPress. The first one is the PHP AI client. This will allow you to connect your WordPress site to LLMs and be able to, within PHP, generate text or generate images or do all those things that LLMs do. This is more for content creation. Then there's the Abilities API and the MCP adapter, which is what we're going to be talking about today. The MCP adapter essentially allows you to turn your WordPress site into an MCP server, so you can connect your AI tools to it. And your Abilities API creates abilities that can be converted into tools that your systems can talk to. Abilities API is something that is planned to be shipped in WordPress 6.9, which is coming later this year. So by the time, if that does get shipped in WordPress core, Ability API support will be native to WordPress. And then some of what we're going to be doing today, you can just do by default within WordPress. You will still need the MCP adapter. I'll show you in a second how that all works. But basically what you can do is you can turn any WordPress site into an MCP server with the MCP adapter. You can register abilities using the Abilities API to do whatever you need it to do. And then you can connect that to your desktop, your AI desktop application, your AI coding tool. You can use it to create content. You can use it to develop. You can use it for various different things. What I'm going to be showing you today is how you can use it from a developer's point of view, and give you some examples of what's possible. So MCP adapter is the first piece of software. It's currently available as a composer package, or installable as a composer package. So I'll talk you through the process of doing that. The Abilities API is the thing that powers the tools for MCP. So when I say tools, let's talk about what I mean by tools. An MCP server has 3 different parts: a host, a client, and a server. And then it has, let's go scroll down here. There's different transport layers, so different ways that the data can talk. And then there is, let's go down here, there are primitives. So MCP primitives there's 3 different things. There's tools, which are executable functions that the AI applications can invoke to perform actions. Okay, so file operations, API calls, database queries, whatever the case may be. The next one is resources, so data sources that provide contextual information. So generally they don't accept an input, they just return a response. And then you have prompts, which are reusable templates that help structure interactions with language models. So system prompts, whatever the case may be. We're going to be working mostly with tools today, but you can dive into resources and prompts as well. But essentially what you do is you create an MCP server, you turn your WordPress site into an MCP server, you register some abilities which get converted into MCP tools, you connect that to your AI coding environment, and then your coding environment can interact with those tools to get context from your MCP server. Okay. So as I mentioned, there's the MCP adapter, there's the Abilities API, and then the last piece of the puzzle is something called MCP WordPress Remote. Now, I'm not going to dive into the transport layers and all this kind of thing. There's a couple of different transport layers. There's standard input, output, and there's streamable HTTP transport. There's also different authentication layers. It supports OAuth and various other things. It can support basic authentication. It can support JSON Web Tokens. It can support OAuth authentication. But this MCP WordPress Remote package is essentially a bridge that allows you to connect your AI assistants or your AI coding tools to an MCP enabled server. Okay, it currently supports OAuth and various other authentication models, but the MCP adapter at the moment only supports the basic authentication option. So I'm going to show you how that works in a second. But essentially what you do is you use npx on the command line, you pass it some arguments, you give it some environment variables, so an API URL, username, password, that kind of thing, and then that's how you connect your site to your local install. Ideally, if you're using this in a production environment, you're going to want to use something like OAuth. If you're using it locally on your local environment, basic authentication is perfectly fine. So that's the process I'm going to show you today. OAuth requires the server to support OAuth, and I'm not aware currently of any WordPress hosts that support MCP on OAuth. There might be some coming soon that I don't know if I can talk about yet. But I'm hoping by the time I get to WordCamp US, I can talk about it. But for now, I'm just going to show you locally how you can set this all up using basic authentication. All right. So we need to have a couple of things configured on our WordPress site for this to work. The first thing you're going to need to use is an application password for your current user. So if you click on your user in the user list and you scroll down, there is an option to create an application password. This is essentially a very simple basic authentication mechanism. It allows you to create separate passwords for separate applications that you can then give to those applications to connect to your WordPress site. The nice thing about it is you can also revoke these passwords. So once you've set it up, if somebody gets hold of it, you can revoke it, they can't access your site. It gives your user, so whatever permissions your user has, whatever application you give this password to will have the same permissions, so don't use it in production environments, rather stick with OAuth, but for local environments it's perfectly fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create an application called MCP, or an application password. I'm going to add an application password. There is the password there, and you'll see I can revoke it when I'm done. So I'm going to copy this out for now, and I'm just going to open up a notepad in a separate window, and I might have to edit this out because it might open up in my main screen. I always forget to clear my Notepad app before I start recording. So I will have edited all of that out, but it's sitting off on the side. So I've copied the password there now. I can see it on my other view. All right. So with that application password in place, the other thing I need to start doing is I need to install the Abilities API code. Now, at the moment, this is available as a plugin, so I can just install the plugin. There are no releases yet, but I can just download it using the code download zip option. There is work being done to get this available as a composer package, which I think is busy being worked on. I'm not sure, but the plan is to have it available as a composer package so we can install it using Composer. For now, I'm just going to download the zip file. I already have it on my desktop. I've downloaded it previously, and I'm going to install it on my WordPress site. So if we go plugins, add plugin. If we go upload plugin, and then if I go to my downloads, there's the Abilities API trunk. You can also obviously use Git and clone this from the GitHub repository. That works just as well. And then you activate the plugin, and all this does is it sets up the Abilities API internally and allows you to work with it. So if we have a look at the code, you will see that there is a simple PHP plugin file that just loads all the relevant classes. So there's the Ability API class, the Abilities registry class, the core Abilities API file, and then the REST endpoint. So there are some REST endpoints that you can use. The Abilities API is not designed specifically for AI stuff. It is also designed to make core abilities just available to either PHP or JavaScript, and the REST API endpoints are what allow JavaScript applications to connect to abilities. You can read more about the Abilities API. I wrote a blog post. I'll open up my website here. So if you go to jonathanbossinger.com and you scroll down to my thoughts and ramblings, there is a post here called the WordPress Abilities API. I talk about the history of it, what it's for, what it's used for. I recommend reading it, why it exists, why it's useful. Give that a read. Okay. So the Abilities API is installed. I can use the functionality within that. That's great. Then what I need to do is I need to create a plugin to manage my MCP server adapter. So I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call it AI Experiments MCP server. And then I'll just create a new plugin file inside of there. AI Experiments MCP server.php. And then I'm going to start creating some PHP code here. So let's just do the default plugin headers. So I'm going to close this, and I'm going to close. Oh, this is a PHP sniffer extension. I'm going to just disable that for now. Okay, that's fine. Okay. So let's give it a plugin name, and we'll just call it AI Experiments. Why is GitHub? GitHub Copilot used to be able to give me some cool. I'm going to pause this for a second. Okay, so don't ask me why, but my Copilot code completions were disabled for some reason. So I've just enabled them. So it's just generated some code for me. So I'm going to just quickly update that. And pop in a better version number. Okay, there we go. So it's my default plugin code, if you will. I'm then going to want to do something like exit. Let's just go exit if accessed directly. That's fine. There's something else doing. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so that's my core code. I'm actually going to switch over to PHP Storm for this because I much prefer working in PHP Storm, and so I'm going to do that over here. I'm going to close down this window. I'm going to close down that window. I'm going to switch over to PHP Storm. I work in PHP Storm every day, so it's just easier for me to use PHP Storm. Okay, let me make the font size a bit bigger. Actually, let me zoom in and say 125. There we go. There we go. Okay. So getting back to my plugin. So I've got my plugin. It's there. It's ready to rock and roll. Now what I need to do is I need to add the MCP adapter support to this plugin, and I need to configure the MCP server. So if you have a look at the MCP adapter code, you will see that it has some instructions on configuring this for through Composer. It's basically initialize your Composer file and then add the repositories and all of that. So let's go ahead and do that. So if we go to Studio, AI Experiments, WP Content Plugins, AI Experiments plugin, and we go Composer init, this initializes the Composer repository. I'm just going to accept practically all the defaults here, except for I'm going to go GPL 2.0 or later. I don't want my dependencies defined. I don't want autoload mapping. Yes, so that's a basic Composer.json file. If you've worked with Composer, you've seen these every day. Then what I need to do is I need to copy out all of this over here, pop that into my Composer.json. And essentially what that does is that sets up a VCS repository, version source control source, I think it is, version control, to point to the MCP adapter plugin, and then I tell it to require the MCP adapter plugin. This, or at least the code. This code should eventually become available as a Composer package through packages, but right now we have to configure it manually. Once I've done that, then I can go Composer install, and it asks me to install all the things that I need. I can trust the Jetpack autoloader because it's just code that autoloads the files for me, and so that's installed, ready to rock and roll. If I have a look at the code, there's a vendor directory with all of the code that it used. I then need to include the autoloader. Now, if you were using PSR4, this might happen for you. I prefer to just do it manually for simple reasons. So now what I can do is I can say require go vendor autoload, and that'll include all of that code in my application. Okay. With that in place, what I can now do is I can initialize the adapter. So I can copy this code as is and pop it here into my plugin. So let's paste that. So that uses the core MCP adapter code, sets up an instance of the adapter, and then starts the adapter server using the MCP adapter init hook. So basically that makes sure that starting the server only runs once all the code is loaded. And then I need to just pass it a server instance or create an instance of the server. I need to specify things like ID and all of that, so we can copy that out of this create the MCP server environment. So let's stick that in there. And now I need to give it an ID, a namespace, and all these kind of things. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make this all the same, more or less. So let's go AI experiments. There we go. So that's the ID of the server. The server has a single namespace for REST API endpoints. These are what I use to connect and get the list of tools. I'm just going to call it AI experiments MCP server and AI experiments MCP server here. Don't really mind what it's called. It's important, you know, to whatever the case may be. You'll see that the code includes the full namespace. You can replace with an import, so you can set up all the use things over here. I just like to do this because it just makes my code a little bit cleaner. And I can do this nicely and quickly in PHP Storm, whereas in other editors you might have to just do this manually. So you don't have to do this. I could have left it like that. And then last but not least, you need to register abilities. Now we don't have any abilities yet, so I'm not going to use any abilities. I'm just going to set up the server with the empty arrays for tools, resources, and props. Okay, so we have the abilities API installed. We've created our MCP server. We've initialized our server. We should be able to start doing things now. If I go over to my WordPress site, I will need to enable that plugin. So there it is over there. So let's activate that. Good, no errors, so that's great. While we're talking about errors, what I always like to do when I'm developing is I like to make sure that my debug settings are on. They're currently set to false. I actually have a little app that I developed for myself called WP Debug. If you want to install this, you're welcome to download it from my GitHub. It basically, when I select a specific WordPress site, it configures the debug settings for me and then pipes them all to this application. So it's just a nice little way that I like to use to view my debug log. Okay, so with that in place, now what I can do is I can test to make sure that my MCP server is working, and I can do that by querying the AI experiments REST API endpoint. So if I go back to my site and I view the front end, and I go WP JSON, which is the REST API endpoint, and pop on AI experiments on the end, I should get something. And the fact that I don't does worry me, but it doesn't. And the reason for this is, if your local environment has doesn't support permalinks other than plain, then you need to set it to something other than plain. The MCP adapter doesn't support query string REST API endpoints. If you don't know what that means, don't worry. But for this, you need to set it to something other than plain. And then when you query the API endpoint, the REST API endpoint, you get some responses. So there we go. The namespace is there. This is working. So this tells me the server is working and I can use it. The next step is to connect my MCP enabled coding tool or desktop application, something that I'm using AI for, to my WordPress server. Now, depending on what you're using, you might need to check the documentation. If you go to VS Code, add MCP server, and go to the VS Code documentation, there are a couple of ways that it talks about how does MCP work and MCP capabilities. You can read up about that. How to add an MCP server can be done in a number of different ways. Especially if you're working with a local server like the one we're doing, you can add one to your workspace using the vscode.mcp.json file, or you can add it to your user configuration, which is a global mcp.json file. It's up to you how you want to do this. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to use the local workspace file. So I've got AI experiments open here. I'm going to create a new directory. That's in the wrong place. I want to be in the root. Okay, so let's create a new directory and we'll call it .vscode. And then let's create a new file and let's call it mcp.json. Now, how you add this to your coding environment might be different. If you're using VS Code, you can follow this. If you're using Cursor, there's an option in Cursor. I don't know Windsurf. I haven't done it in PHP Storm yet. I'm going to eventually, probably before the workshop, hopefully. But that gives you the mcp.json file. And then you need to add the servers using this JSON format. So I'm going to just pop the example code in here so we can look at what it looks like. So essentially, you set up a bunch of servers. You give the server a name or an ID. You tell it the type of connection and the URL to where the server is hosted. For our purposes, we need a couple of things. We need the AI experiments MCP REST API endpoint, the one we configured in our server here, so the namespace and the root. We need the username and we need the password. So if you have a look at the MCP WordPress remote code, if we scroll down to WordPress application passwords, here we go. So it's WordPress, the command is npx, so you need to have npx installed on your machine, the arguments, and these are the environment variables. You'll see here, this is using MCP servers. This is the cursor way of doing it, I think it is. In VS Code, it's just servers. So we can copy out this WordPress part here, and we can go into our VS Code environment. And we can update, we can replace this with that. Okay, so now let's go through what changes we should make. So the first thing that I like to do is I like to give it a name that relates to this site that I'm working with. And the reason I do that is because if you don't give it a logical name, sometimes it can be difficult for you to, because the name of the server also gives context to the LLM. So it's a good idea to name it the same URL or the same name. Even just AI experiments is also fine, so that when you make requests and you say get me the site info of my AI experiment site, it knows what to query to get the information. Okay, npx you need installed on your terminal. So if you don't have it installed, so if I go npx -v, there's the version that's running. If you don't have it installed, you go to Node.js. Go to the Node.js website, you can install it there. Another good option is via NVM. Which allows you to install multiple versions of Node if you need to. If you don't have Node.js, it's going to be difficult to get all this worked out. Okay, so you need npx installed. There is one small little, let's call it bug in MCP at the moment. I'm hoping this gets fixed soon. So let me go through to the docs and go through to troubleshooting and show you that. If you're using NVM to manage multiple Node versions, it sometimes gets the wrong npx version and can break. So it's a good idea to get the URL to the actual most recent current version of npx. So on a Linux environment, you can go which, or a Mac environment, you can go which npx to get the current default one that's installed. And you can replace that full path in your PHP command area, and that'll work. Sorry, your npx command area. If you just have one version of npx installed, make sure it's version 22 or higher, and then just put in npx and you'll be fine. For my case, I have a couple of versions installed. Let's just go to, let me show you. So let's go cd, and I'll list that out. So you see, so I currently only have version 22.16 installed, so I could have just gone with npx there, and it would have worked. I've gotten to a default now, just putting in the full path. Okay, the arguments remain the same, so it's just yes, and then it's using that MCP WordPress remote package. Then we need to set up all of this over here. So as I was saying earlier, this is essentially the full path to that MCP namespace and root. So it's MCP at the end of it that we've configured in the server. So I go here and MCP. So there we go. So that's the full path. Your username is your username on the site. So in my case, it's admin because we created the password for the admin. And your application password is that application password that I copied out earlier. So I'm going to grab that from my Notepad app, and I'm going to pop that in there. Okay, if you're not using OAuth, you don't need to specify that OAuth enabled is false. You could just leave that out. It'll default to false, and this should work. Now in VS Code, you'll see it creates this little start button above the server. Cursors works differently. Other applications work differently. I like the fact that VS Code gives you the start button there. So now I can hit start, and this will try and connect to the MCP server. And you'll see it's giving me an error. So now what I can do in VS Code is I can say view output. No, not view output. I apologize. View, I think it's debug console. No, it's one of these. Is it problems? Output? It's one of these. Oh, I'm not getting anything. Okay, so one other thing that you can do is you can specify when these things go wrong. Let me find that here. You can specify a log file. So it'll log any issues to that log file. I'm just trying to find if there's a example. Here's all the environment variables. there, log file. So we can specify a log file in the environment variables. So let's do that. And what we will do is we will go Studio, AI Experiments. I'm going to put it in the plugins. So WP, Content, Plugins, AI Experiments, MCP Server. So let's pass that path in. And then just call it MCP log or whatever the case may be. There we go. Let's get rid of that so we can see what we're doing. Okay, so there's the log file. So let's restart this. Okay, there we go. Now we're seeing some output. Okay, so we're seeing some errors. Fetch failed. It looks like it's not able to find the... oh, that's right. Okay. So if you're using a local WordPress install that has a locally generated SSL certificate, you will need to tell MCP Remote to, or at least NPX, to ignore certification check. So that's another one in the troubleshooting doc. You'll see down here, local development environments in SSL. You need to set the node TLS reject unauthorized variable to 0. So it basically tells node not to worry about local SSL certs. We can accept them, they're fine. So let's just add this to the top here. And now if we restart this, it looks like it's working. Yay, we've got something happening. So you'll see there it's running, but that's it. It's just running. We can't do anything with it. Now we need to give it tools. Now we need to give it stuff that the AI coding agent can interact with, can do things with. So the way we do that is we register abilities, and then we add those tools to the server. All right, so what I went and did was I grabbed an example of an ability from the workshop code that I had prepared. If you want to see this in action, you can come to the workshop. But essentially, I'm hooking into the API, the Abilities API init action hook, which is a new hook that is being added by the Abilities API. And then I am registering the ability using WP register ability. You can go and read about this ability in the documentation. So if you go to the documentation in the Abilities API code on registering abilities, it talks about how to register an ability. You essentially use the WP register ability function, pass it a name. This is actually, you need to fix this as name, not ID, and an array of arguments. The parameters are explained here, but I'm going to run through them very quickly in the code. You need to give it the name. So it's usually namespace / and the name of the ability. Give it a label and a description. Those are very important because it provides that context to the LLMs. You need to define an input schema and an output schema. So this is the schema of the data that you're going to be sending the ability and receiving from the ability. So the data being sent and received is usually a JSON object, but you need to tell the ability what data it expects and what data it expects to receive back. You need to give it schema, so you need to say what type it is, what properties will come back, the name of the properties, what type each property is, and a description of the property. And this again gives the MCP tool or gives the AI agent context so that it knows what it's working with. For my ability, I'm getting the site name, the site URL, active theme, active plugins, PHP version, and WordPress version. Once you've defined your input and output schema, you can define an execute callback. This will be the callback function that runs, that actually powers the ability and gets the data or receives the data or uses the data that you're sending it. And then last but not least, you can specify a permission callback that determines what type of users can access this ability. So if the user that you're using doesn't have that permission, it can't access this ability. And then the callback function in this case is very simple. It's just getting the site name, URL, active theme, active plugins, PHP version, and WordPress version, and returning that array to the ability. So this is how I can register an ability on a WordPress site. And then what I do is I take the ability name and I add it to the list of MCP tools in the server creation. Now I could probably add this as a resource because a resource is only ever sending data. So this could be used as a resource, but I'm going to leave it as a tool because it doesn't really matter too much for our example. Now with that in place, if I go and open up my MCP JSON and I start my server, you will see that it shows that it has one tool available. You can also view the tool. So if you hit, I think it's Command or Control Shift and P to open up your command palette, you can go MCP, I think it's list tools or something. No, I don't think this is where I need to be. Maybe it's not there. Maybe it's somewhere else. Let's just see. Oh, yeah, here it is. If you click on the little tools icon in VS Code, it shows all the tools that are available. And there is my AI experiment server, and it shows that there is the site info tool, and you'll see it returns information about this WordPress site. So it knows that's the context for this tool. So with that tool in place and with that server connected, if I now run the exact same query to the LLM that I did earlier, and I say get the site info of my AI experiment site, watch what happens. It actually thinks about it and actually realizes, hey, there is a site info tool that I can use. And if I run that tool, it'll actually, if there's input, it'll send the input, it'll return the output, and then it'll use that to give me that information in a human readable format. And so now if you think about that, if you think about all the things that you can build to give your AI coding tool context about the database, about the files, about the content, about the plugin you're working on, you can do so much more with these abilities and these MCP tools. I'm going to show a couple of examples of this in my workshop at WordCamp US, so if you're coming along, look forward to that. If you're not coming along, I might do a second video where I show some of these examples of some of these tools. If you enjoyed this video, give me a like. Please think about subscribing. I'm going to be doing as much MCP AI, PHP AI stuff as I can on this video, on this channel. But if you're coming to US, please make sure to connect, and I'll see you there. Bye.